Сессия на тему «Панельная Москва. Ограничения и потенциал развития» начинается в зале А прямо сейчас.
Dear participants of the third Moscow Urban Forum, the session Panel Moscow, Limitations and Development Potential is starting now in Hall A.
И мы с радостью приглашаем на сцену модератора сессии Александра Ложкина.
We are pleased to invite to the stage the moderator of the session, Alexander Lozhkin.
I'd like to invite to the stage Yury Grigoryan, director of the project Meganom Architectural Bureau, Director of Education at the Strelka Institute for Media, Alexei Muratov, partner at the Strelka Consulting Bureau, Head of Strategies for Territorial Development, Grigory Revzin, Special Correspondent of the Kommersant Publishing House, expert at the Strelka Institute for Media, Professor of the Graduate School of Urban Studies and Planning, Mr. Mikhail Blinkin, Higher School of Economics. And I would like to introduce to you the participants of the discussion, which is Sergei Kuznetsov, Chief Architect of Moscow, Brian Evans, founder and board member of the Academy of Urbanism, Andrei Chernikov, Vice President of the International Academy of Architecture, Daniyar Yusupov, expert of the Open City Laboratory Independent Expert Initiative, Saint Petersburg, Oleg Bayevsky, Deputy Director of the State University, and Oliver Schultz, co-owner of Schultz Grassov, partner at City Makers. And so we're beginning our discussion, the discussion that will be dedicated to the main subject of our urban forum. And so what we're going to talk about is the research that was done by the Institute Strelka. So that's about specifically for Moscow Urban Forum. So this study, this research, actually speaks about the way Moscow looks like, where the overwhelming majority of Muscovites live. And I suggest we start. So first, let's listen to what Yury Grigoryan has to say. Good afternoon. I would like to start my presentation saying a couple of words about the structure of the study. That it consisted of a number of disciplines, and this is an interdisciplinary study, and I'm going to talk about three of them, so architecture, culture, and politics. Okay, and so this presentation, let me show you some slides that I showed you earlier at the plenary meeting, but a very important point in the context of what I'm going to say. We asked our colleagues from Mobility and Chain to talk about the density, 6-minute accessibility, and see how it interacts with the density of the population. So transport availability, accessibility, so the Paris, Istanbul, Moscow, São Paulo, and Tokyo. And so the good is Paris and Tokyo, and Istanbul and São Paulo, where it doesn't coincide. I mean that the length of the trip and so the accessibility of public transport. Usually it's in the downtowns of the cities, and some other cities it's in the outskirts. And so this intersection. So then it in Paris, so it coincides. In Tokyo, to a great extent. São Paulo, Istanbul doesn't coincide, and in Moscow, it's it doesn't coincide. So here you can see distribution of density in Moscow, and here another, so the transportation accessibility index. So let's see what's going to happen with transportation accessibility by 2025, when this expensive program will have been implemented. So the index of transport accessibility will improve, but certainly it will not cover evenly the entire territory of the city, and it will not improve the transportation isolation of the south and east. So this is where people feel themselves that they live on periphery, because living in periphery, you get the idea that you live so far away from Moscow, and what if it takes you only 20 minutes to get downtown on the metro, then you feel much closer to the city. So this is a correlation of accessibility clusters and the density peaks of the population and their relationship. So here we need to talk about why we selected the city periphery, so the urban edge. So because Moscow is a monocentric city, and that so 60 years ago, so the density went of the population went through the roof, spiked, but we decided to start so talking about the first belt, which architecturally and from other viewpoints it's better formed, and I think that the main challenges are there. And although just we need to talk about from the Moscow Kremlin all the way to the environs of Moscow. And so this is the distribution, the archaeology of the periphery. And so we decided just to talk in the architecture chapter, just to kind of take stock of what we have. So we took stock of the waves of housing development, starting from 2017 to 2013, 1917 to 2013, and we decided we did it by hand, so we just decided to go by waves of construction. And so you can see those waves since 1917 to 2013. It's publicly available right now. And what you can see is why we took out the center, because the gravity from the center which emanates is so strong that you cannot regard periphery with the center. It's impossible. That's why we decided just to take so this downtown Moscow out of our discussion to make the discussion more clear and understandable. So you can see the maps, how the city was building up, and so the number of houses built in the 70s and the 90s, and very few before that houses were built. And this is very important because now, because we don't know what is going to happen to those houses built, apartment blocks built in the 60s and 70s. We don't know what their destiny will be, so eventually they will be replaced, but the history need to be related to this time dynamics, so to extrapolate it like that. To get a clearer picture. So you can see the typology of different types of series of apartment houses. And so you can see then, with the exception of so then the aesthetic factor. So let me quote Nina Krainia, that everyone was interested in new forms. It was a subconscious expectation of comfort and separate residency, so we were passionate about the novelty of the problem and the thinking that the new aesthetics is equal comfort for all. And so this is a very good finding for me during the study that I've made, because it was to be expected, and we approached this territory as something valuable, but we designed it and we put our heart and soul into it, and it only testifies to the fact that they were doing it very sincerely when they were building those housing developments, when they were constructing So but now it's kind of if we say that it's wasted now, I don't think that it's true to the word, because I think that there's a great deal of potential there. So we cannot just replace these houses immediately, within the next several years. But it's still very attractive in some ways, in its own way. And so then we did the physical study of accessibility by foot. So our students from our college, and we're very grateful to them, so they broke the city down into 20 squares, and then they did it. So they evaluated different accessibility levels and 73%, it was to be expected after they did the accessibility evaluation. So 73% is available, is accessible, it's transparent, and as you can walk through it and you can get to your destination. 73% of Moscow's territory is good. There's no problem about that, even in daylight, especially in daylight. Then there's all the discussions with economists and all these factors that we have thrown in, so generated a concept that we'll speak about later. But then the concept of a super park, of a new land, that we intend, that actually provides for several strategies, several phases. So the first strategy is maintenance. It's keeping, retention, and so we need we made a new catalog of the architectural legacy. So because not only buildings but housing amalgamations of bigger size, and then openness needs to be kept, and so because the openness of environment can be value and heritage by themselves. Then so the second strategy is breaking down into smaller components. When you do housing development, we build new houses, breaking them into smaller components. And dividing them into small units, and so when you build when the housing development is broken down by quarters, into smaller elements. And then connectivity of the environment, that's very easy. Then to avoid the isolated areas, and the transportation program and the architecture program. So all the master plans that are being developed, so they need to be mindful of the connectivity. So if all what they do does not contribute to higher connectivity, should be scrapped immediately. Then saturation. And opening up new centers. So we show those small administrative overnight districts. And that's a resource, it's a potential that needs to be tapped. And then the second is compression and reserving. So then increasing the concentration and density, as opposed to open, big, spacious territories. And then another is reserving, so finding space for future development, the good resource spots of land, so where the future developments will take place. And then the slow phased-in growth. And then two types of projects that we currently can do. They do not deny each other. So then acupuncture, that can be done right now. So small pinpoint projects that. So, for example, the park ring, super park may become one of the projects, and they will not they will live in common harmony together, and they do not deny does not deny the existence of the other. Thank you. So we'll open the floor to questions later. I'd like to give the floor to our next speaker. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for participating in this session. I was responsible for the cultural component of this discussion, of this project, but I decided to. So the research archaeology of periphery, that was the study, and the culture was regarded as in the sense of it was construed, in the sense of culture was. So culture was understood anthropologically. So not buildings, not institutions, assets that exist in the city, but as a combination of skills, cultural, civilized skills, and that our society. So if you look at these people as a tribe, for example, you consider what they have. So what their traits, customs, traditions are, what they think of themselves, and how they fill in this space. Was kind of anthropological description of Muscovites, and how they make use of the environment, how they make use of the space. So we need to understand that space, and so then the space that we're talking about is a space created so historically in a very short period of time, 50 years time, and it was implemented. And this is the realized utopia of modern project. When 4/5 of Moscow, and so you can certainly find some enchantments there, and but the scale is huge. But they know about the drawbacks. But this is a gigantic project anyway, and the cultural custom that is behind it, the trait. It's like a cartoon. It looks like a modern city if you compare it to an organic city. So the organic city is an organism, and then if you start to make an autopsy and study its viscera, and then you start to understand it's a kind of so like the body of a cow. As you cut it up and then you put it together. It's artificial construction, and the main principle is as follows: one single territory. Is one function, so one equals the other, and then other are auxiliary functions, so industrial functions, and the industrial function was the main function, and then other just provided services to making sure that this main industrial function runs well, and that was the idea. This is a post-industrial city, era. So the point is that this huge periphery. So they had centers in the form of those industrial zones, all these areas, industrial areas. So they were kind of collected together into one center in the form of this industry. Now that the industry has stopped, and there's no more production, manufacturing, and so it's not working the way it was working. So it's decentralized now. It's not coherent anymore, not cohesive. And so, for example, so this is just collected different areas together. So I mean the industrial cement, and so like the Kremlin, so these two big funnels. And with regards to the rest, and the second approach was the principle of equality, of providing at each little cell same things, so that the city environment provides. So as applied to culture, for example, so then there should be 50 square centimeters of culture per person in Moscow. So that included libraries, museums, etc. And then we got this evenly spread infrastructure of culture, so libraries, culture houses, movie theaters, and so then they spread evenly, and it was so equally stressed territory. So where everything is the same, everything is equal. And so then the situation doesn't change. And at the end of the day, we can say that today's urban ideas concerning the center and the centricity, that's what we're talking about right now. And so there are other viewpoints, but then it's superposition of functions. In some places, more concentrated, life is more concentrated, and the specifics is that in the downtown there are more functions, more concentrated, and it's more functional. Although, so during the design effort, so when Moscow was designed, So the idea, and so when we got the idea to expand the city, so we worked on the assumption that in Moscow, so there are several centers that trading, educational, medical centers, so all downtown. So let's just separate them, and that was the idea behind so adding new territory. But since so the monofunctional center doesn't exist anymore, but nevertheless, so then the idea that the center provides for the concentration functions of putting them together, and it's there in today in the urban theory. So, but when we look at this space, so it was designed as an equally stressed area, so with equal minimum number of functions. That was the design. And so everywhere is just an equally accessible set of services. It's a utopian because 50 square centimeters per person of cultural heritage. It's a utopian slogan. So it's just taking it to the to extremes and making it ridiculous. But still, so there is such statistics. And then people were put to live there 50 years ago. And so people just were happy. And so this is the festivity on the Tomorrow Street. But they live 60 years there, and they continue to live on this street of tomorrow. And it's still a street of tomorrow. And 60 years ago they started. And so people, so they were put in an artificial environment, artificial space, like just put them in a matrix, and everything is the same, no difference. All houses are the same, everything is the same. And we then when we did our research, we worked on the assumption saying, let's look at the founding principle of how these districts were designed, and each point of so how many functions are accessible to each resident. And so then there's this multifarious nature of those functions. You can see them, this on the table. So we calculated different functions. And then we did some math, quite complicated. And Mrs. Tarnavetskaya did it with the professor from Nizhny Novgorod. So they were building those isometric maps of accessibility. Very interesting. So tomorrow there will be a final meeting, and so there will be a big report about this math and how this map was designed. But the idea is that we drop this map, isometric map, of functionalities. So how many functions? So how many? This is the final. So how many functions are accessible on each point? So when it's red, it means that more than 100 functions are accessible. Yes, within walking distance, within foot traffic, walking distance, 2 kilometers. And then so that's what these maps look like. That is why we can see that so 4 clearly cut zones that are in red, which all of a sudden they showed concentration of those functions available to the people. And for me, it was unexpected. It was an unexpected result because it's the Sokol area, and then it's the big Cherkizovskaya street, and more or less predictable. Then the Akademicheskaya area was less predictable to me, because I thought that the university area there would be more functions available. No, this reduction, very down spike, a big one, and so then and then only 20 across the street. And then I think also the Marina area was struck me as most unusual because it was the last expected administration concerning the functionality, availability to the people. Marina is as good as Taganka by the Russian. It's a very unexpected finding. And This is the isometric map, the plan of 1971 that provided for the availability of peripheral centers, and all these centers did not coincide with the points, except Sokol. So that's where this city function started to appear, and the centers of crisscrossing those functions. And but we need to say that from the viewpoint of architectural manifestation, so there are no prerequisites to have these places to develop a new centricity. We did not expect that, because nothing special, nothing salient about that. So there's 4 types of these centers, but nothing specific about them. But they exist anyway. And this is the process that has not been managed, and so organic evolution. So the good example. So on top is the map of shops at the beginning of Kutuzovsky Prospect. At the bottom is the map of boutiques at the beginning of Kutuzovsky Prospect. If you look at these 2 maps, you will see that as shops, all boutiques are located on the right-hand side for some reason as you move downtown. But the simple shops, groceries, are located on the left side. And you can try just to explain that for some people just going into the city, just they drop in at boutiques, and then the gravitation is the Europeisky shopping mall. But it's all wrong. All these assumptions are wrong, because the first boutique appeared on the right side, and there was the third one, second one, and then it turned out it's to be more plush, and the left side is more democratic. That's it. It's just the first one was built there, and then so all of a sudden these centers haphazardly appear and different concentrations, which actually make the city, so they appear 4 additional centers besides the main center, the main downtown. Yeah, less. Okay. So when we're trying to understand how they came about, what these centers are, so the nature of them is quite strange. So this is the situation. The center in the area of Izmailovsk, the big Cherkizovsk street. So there's only one street. It's in between big forested areas, and along this line, so there is this concentration of different functions. If we look at Marina, so we have the Moscow River, and so the bridge, and 2 centers appear, just one earlier, then the other one appeared later. Maria and Brateyevo, so they're the same. So price-wise, as Brateyevo is younger, that's it. And so, here is the genesis. So we can see the bifurcation of a street. That's it. So Leningrad Highway, and that the bifurcates with Volokholamsk Highway and Leningrad Highway. So these 3 formations. This is a classical way the city is formed at the bifurcation near the river. So it looks like it happens not in the city but in the country. So that's what the country people would do. Just near the river, just on some commanding heights, whatever. And it's not mega cities. So when it's, I guess, unites many big agglomerations. So the bigger New York is a mega city. But in the city fabric, all of a sudden, they appear in certain places, kind of the second-level cities. So where there is you can observe, so concentration of functionalities. So the main principles of city building, so the main basic things. So the city appears, transportation, metro, work, etc. So then it's not relevant anymore for this formation. Metro is everywhere, and so it doesn't describe why it should be there. It's not simply sales. I mean, those centers of functionality. And transport, power. So they are just general characteristics of a territory, of the country of Moscow. And this in the country of Moscow, there appear small cities. So for 300, 400,000 population each. So that the centrality, yeah, that's how it goes. Thank you. Alexei Muratov, partner of designer office Strelka. Good evening, dear friends. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this politics component. So we worked together with Mrs. Vindina, and from the very beginning, so we reduced this subject. So we decided to talk about the policy of grants, and I will further reduce our work, and I will talk only about small component related to certain aspects of land use. So where I will quickly scratch the surface in a matter of 10 minutes, so you can see. So there are books and articles and leaflets. So you can find them and talk to the people who are in the conference room as well. What is policy? It's ideology plus certain instruments. How to make this ideology manifest. So if we start from the ideological aspect, then forming a certain policy, it was important for us to draw an attractive image of this beautiful donut, so then we have certain instruments to work on it. So when drawing this image, so we worked on several assumptions. So first is the position of this donut in the structure of the agglomeration. It's a double periphery. So the first historic center that is strengthened so during the course of its existence, and the smaller railway ring, and then the second ring is the new formations, urbanistic formations that are developing so fast. So Balashikha and Metishi, that's satellite cities which have a good connection by highway or by railroad. And so then during the implementation of large-scale long-term projects like Skolkovo, developers projects like A101, so that's how Moscow evolves. And the second thing that I would like to posit, what? And the second point related to the history of the formation of those residential districts and its genetic proximity to the concept of smaller cities. So because these small districts, they represent a specific Soviet idea of equality on the basis of developed socialism, lots of green, the public transportation, so then step-by-step system of service. So this is what makes likens so the Soviet earlier residential developments with the cities gardens, with the garden cities. Let's say Gorky Park, recreation park. So then we can compare so the density of housing development, so then the quarter by quarter and the administrative districts. Yes, about the footprint is 2-3 times less than in the event of traditional housing.
And all those considerations bring us to the image that we are demonstrating here, designed by the young people of our design bureaus, the super park. Just like the natural space is authentically equal to the natural, so the super park is going to balance the super city, becoming an additional center and creating a very high social density and super intensive of financial, transportation, and information flows. And in this context, this super park is the place to relax, to discharge, to unwind, and this super park can be perceived as the incarnation of the garden city, but an attempt to look at the residential environment through the eyes of Peter Sloterdijk, the German philosopher, as a self-existing greenhouse, providing the comfort to the people, both physical and spiritual. This is not a forest city or taiga city, like should not be this way. This is a socially differentiated environment, as Grigory has shown us, with the centralities and the quiet zones. As in our little city, we have so much land. The land use is the priority, so that this fact of land could be used as an advantage. We increase the question of increasing efficiency of the city landscapes. We understand the landscapes in a wider sense of the word. And this efficiency may be very multifaceted, may be origin, and the first and probably the most important efficiency is social efficiency and productivity. When the people, the residents, are interested in improving the social environment, and you get a very good solidarity in the environment, and probably if you want to compare it to something, it's like a vegetable patch in the city. So like the one in Toronto, where they have arranged a big greenhouse campus where people can do some gardening together and then arrange meals together. And this is an example that this activity can be done in the climates of Moscow, in the climatic zone. And this combination of the natural and social beginning is intrinsic for a community, for the micro region. So being an architectural manifestation of lack of private property for land, this was initially intended to be a natural environment where residents have full contact with the social and natural environment. And this is very telling. And this cultural like with this Химки-Ховрина procurement structure developed somewhere 50 years ago in the last century, where you have natural merge of environment, natural culture, and where we embed those inter-regional spaces onto the green backbone of this territory, and provides you with the widest range of over 60 cultural and social institutions, like a very exotic kind of some television lab. So, and then coming back to Brian Evans, who is in the first rows, who was cooperating with us on this project, and so we see that in modern Moscow we don't see any obstacles to do such community spaces for the natural backbone of the capital, and as a result this territory becomes part of the infrastructure to support the eco balance. But I believe Mr. Evans can elucidate us more in further detail. And this social and economic conglomerate can be complemented with the transportation structure. We cooperated with another prominent expert on this, and at least 50% of these local territories can be connected much better with the city. And another type of efficiency or productivity, production in the context. To do with getting some fruit from the territory. Very often we hear proposal to build some easily assembled constructs that could fill the yards with different functions, but I will skip some slides and proposals of Alexei group that were made within the competition for Big Moscow. I understand you should point at here. As other countries demonstrate, a new construction here will not hurt, and it would really be favorable for those out-of-the-box constructs. So we see Orly, the region in Orly, where we see low-rise buildings, and that helped us to articulate this kind of rough city fabric and to attract some affluent, some mid-class people and professionals that really help to improve the human capital in this earlier unfavorable region. And this before building this, definitely the architects made a master plan, then developing, then preparing, grooming the territory, then allocating the lands and distributing and just providing categories to the lands as residentials and public. So let me tell you about this question of distributing the land, and brings us back to Moscow. We know that in Moscow we are having this process of land allocation. For instance, one of the Kuntseva. So the land distribution so far we don't have much information though the process went through the public hearing. When analyzing these projects, we see that the share of the public lands and the lands that the city keeps is less than 30. And so the 30% of the land goes to the city, and approximately 70% will be owned by different landowners, private landowners. Look at Singapore, which is a very popular example of very wise land use. So here, on this island, we see absolutely reverse ratio. So 70% of the land is controlled by the government, and 30% are privately owned lands. Each of those two extremes have their pluses and minuses, benefits and deficiencies, and your preferences is very individual. On one hand, land is a resource. On the other hand, land is a burden, and it requires very intensive. It's very resource intensive, and you should really understand what you are doing. And primarily, we need to talk about a very comprehensive and thought-over policy, which should be really comprehensive. So. Firstly, a relevant law should be passed, a proper law. Then definitions should be developed, and then only the lands should get the titles, and then the city interest should be the priority, not the private owners. And in midterm, if such documents may not be prepared, we need to address the very difficult regions, and then use the French experience of Zeus, those city zones that will help you to highlight at least some regions, just like Birylova, require immediate care, require immediate action. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alexei. Please take a seat. I have a question immediately. You said that in those micro-rayons, this micro-rayon was intended as kind of a comprehensive social and natural environment, and it was a kind of a utopia. And I understand that the problem of materializing what we got is society incapable of simply servicing those territories, and hence we have empty lands or lands that will be captured by the citizens on their volition, like just putting illegal garages. And do you think we may see a situation when the territory will belong to no one? No one will be caring and responsible for it. No, I believe in Moscow it will not be exactly fair, because we came to a conclusion that the Moscow periphery is in rather good shape, and this good shape can be explained with proper central planning of this and development of this periphery. The question is to what extent the resources of such planning will continue to exist, because in any case all this participation of the residents in managing such districts, financial and social, are very important, and it is we understand that this is important not to exaggerate, not to overestimate such participation, because these regions have been planned properly, they are managed, they have facilities, engineering, communication networks, and all the utilities. And when we talk about community management, we are talking about some kind of switching the responsibility, the financial responsibilities, to people, partially. So, but how it's going to influence the management of such communities? So this is still a subject to study. So one of the main issues is transportation. So I would like to pass the floor to Michael Glinkin. Thank you very much. In this project, just like Alexei told us, I can tell you exactly, because I have been watching this project for with great interest, and let me tell you a story, a legend, kind of a legend for a story. On a fine sunny Saturday, I was sitting and trying to classify some high-rise building through engineering criteria. If you know the map of Moscow, Birylova, Kursk, Paveletskaya, so the connection to the big land along the Podolskih Kursantov string, and then it turns, it's a dead end, a wonderful region. So I classified it as requiring radical revitalization. Otherwise, the consequences will be extremely detrimental. After I wrote it, built some chart, and I turned on the radio and found out what exactly was happening there. This riot and raids and the vegetable procurement. So it is extremely poor and dilapidated region. So this requires radical revitalization. This is the first thing you notice when you look at this region. And most of the land plots are quite decent. No disaster. But speaking about my professional point of view, speaking about the accessibility, we have the notion of geometric accessibility. For instance, if I can walk to the commuter train or metro underground, and I have this definition of capacity accessibility. If I can drive along those lanes. So take Vishniki. If it is walking accessibility from Vykhina is very good. It will take you 10 minutes to reach every corner. But after we extended that line to Zhulebina, we now have a big question mark on this accessibility, because I can I can walk to the metro, but I cannot get in. And looks like the Moscow periphery is going to face this issue on a systemic level. Because without transportation corridors like the big Paris, when we have in one transport corridor, we have metro and other modes, we shall not be able to survive. The Moscow metro is unrivaled globally, because we can take 65,000 people an hour, but we need to carry more. And physically, we cannot squeeze them in. They will walk to the metro. Everything is there. And some good architects thought about the beauty of the system, but we physically cannot squeeze them in. And the next question, you mentioned my beloved Singapore. So the model of land use, the building and transport in Singapore, unlike this country, is based on a very strict understanding of realities. The city is extremely dense, small and dense. There is no place except reclaim land than to venture to. So roads take 11%, almost like in Moscow. Well, yeah, almost the same as in Moscow. What did Lee Kuan Yew do? He said, we shall never have more than 200 cars per 1,000. There is no democracy. He's the ruler. And 200 cars per 1,000, and they did it until last autumn. They were watching it closely. So in October, I spoke to the top guy, and I was like, how can you make it? So we just sell vouchers at the bed, the vouchers to buy a car. They sell permissions to buy a car. So you cannot buy a car without buying a voucher first. So you have to pay 300% for the voucher, and then you can buy a car. So only a very, quite a rich person can buy a car in Singapore, because first you have to pay 300% for it. So it sounds like a communism, in Singapore, what you do. And Lee Kuan Yew has never meant to create socialism, but when there is very strict understanding, there is transit reality development. So transit reality development, that has nothing to do with socialism or communism, and if you combine it with the car-oriented mobility, that gives you a square wheel. We have invented this square wheel and tried to roll it, but it wouldn't roll because it's square. Yeah, thank you very much. I trust that Singapore is better in a way that they probably have less car traffic. In Moscow, we have more than 400 cars per 1,000 of citizens. We are catching up with good European cities in this car count per head. I would like our experts sitting in the front row to chip in, to participate in our discussion. Please, Mr. Evans. You can take a roaming mic, I guess, or you can go to the stage, to the podium, as you wish.
Be here this afternoon, and a great pleasure to participate in this piece of work. It's such an important piece of work, I think, to think about this donut as you have expressed it, Yury. I had the good fortune to look at the green-blue system. In English these days we might describe this as green infrastructure. And in fact, as Yury and Alexei have said, the structure of the periphery in Moscow, partly through the legacy of central planning, is quite good. There is remnant forest. Of course, as we heard yesterday, in many other cities, the west is better than the east. especially in respect of water quality, for example. But in the periphery of this 70+% of people who have this accessibility, they can also walk within 20 minutes to a watercourse or to a park. That's a very high level of accessibility to green and blue systems. And therefore this green-blue system within the superpark can be an ecological resource for the future. It can be a parkland resource, the natural capital, if you like. And because of that, it can also function, as Alexei has described, for productive values, agricultural qualities, and of course recreational. It's very important these days that we understand that ecology is not just a good thing. It's so much more than that. We are moving in many places, in most cities, from protection and prohibit in respect of the natural environment to conserve and enhance the natural environment. And these are not just my words. We heard them in my session yesterday from Anton Kolbachevsky, who is head of the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Protection here in Moscow. He was talking about the human ecology. I very much support that. If we accept Wolfgang Taubner's words yesterday that the city of tomorrow is built today, then the cleanliness of the water system is extremely important. It's clean when it comes into Moscow, it passes through Moscow center, and then it is not so clean, or it's poor. And the water system is of course a system. It flows, so it can't be seen as sequences of neighborhoods. It flows through neighborhoods. This continuity of water and continuity of parks is extremely important. So this area can function as an ecological area, a recreational area, and because of that it can contribute to the physical and mental health of the people who live and work in the periphery. And indeed it can also be, as Alexei has explained, a productive resource, so that things can be grown. Is very important as we understand more about the cost of food transportation, that we understand, and cities from London to New York and throughout the world, global cities are looking at local food production. So I think all of these functions are incredibly important to this vision for the superpark, and I commend my colleagues for doing this work. Thank you.
Спасибо. Теперь я попрошу.
Thank you very much. So Daniel Yusupov is requested to come on the podium and with his presentation. So definitely this project is striking in terms of scale. I don't mean the scale alone, but the material that was shown, the Moscow and the environment in comparison to other mega cities of the world, and the way of delivery and the research. And I'm less attracted by the conclusions, and I believe that the methodology of research is very interesting, methodology of the study, because the most attractive is the theory of the periphery, so the way to understand what we consider to be periphery, that we have to cultivate somehow to understand what we do with the periphery that we deal with or want to deal with. In this respect, I believe this idea is very attractive, that the downtown may not be exactly where you put it in the project. So naturally it will shift to another spot. You can put in so much effort to be in the downtown, but finally you discover that you're in the middle of nowhere. I really like this topography of the shift of centrality and periphericity of the So somehow I've seen Moscow, the periphery becomes in the downtown, and St. Petersburg, that used to be bigger, there's the fan city, where the centrality and periphery follow like clockwise, and in Berlin counterclockwise, in the reverse direction, the gentrification, this centrifugal force. Centrifugal and whatever. So the mirror reflection of St. Petersburg when the center approaches the periphery. And this dynamic vision is closer to the urban and allows us to work with the architectural images that are clad in stone, but that we try to neglect when we jump from one era to another. It helps. And then I'm very interested in the question, so periphery, is it a potential or a disaster and a burden, or is it a blessing, or what are the circumstances whereby you can consider a periphery a resource, a blessing, or a curse? And in this case, I like the comparison to the slums that we studied in the first part. And our social economic landscape, this vision has totally different manifestation to formal development or informal development, so the processes that occur by themselves. And sometimes kick the processes that we try to capture in our architectural and city building solutions. And this dynamic vision of the periphery development, it would be good to catch the idea of the values that we can inherit from the periphery. And some values are lost somehow, insufficient logic of systemic organization of the regions, of micro-rayons that dominate in Moscow. We can still use them, or we'll lose them finally. And probably this legacy of important values will provide us some new grounds to build in future. And the only value that we cannot inherit is the scale of development, to replace one scale of the project by a similar one, I doubt is possible. And this is the reason that will make us choose other strategies and systemic solutions that will work out in different circumstances. And the solution by itself is not an simple architectural form that will just be loaded into this gigantic form, and we say, this is how we are going to develop. No, it won't, because it will give us new periphery that we shall have to face and fight, those systemic distributed small projects that many cities much smaller like Copenhagen used. And this is a very good way or image to inherit and process the information as food for thought from this project and study. And this gives us long-term view on such approaches. I would like to go back to the discussion that I happened to have with Alexei, and probably ask Mr. Boyarsky to share his vision. What should be the setting boundaries structure, the land survey, land marking, So it's not only the landmarking that I wanted to discuss and the zoning. First, let me thank the colleague for getting acquainted with the planning structure of Moscow, but speaking about the considerations, the presentation of Grigory. So I believe that handling Moscow as a result of evolution and intended activity, we need to analyze both the result and the activity.
The activity proper and the concepts that were the foundation of this activity. And then within this triangle, you can find an answer to this question. And if we approach it this way, if the research is organized in this fashion, you will not have an illusion that the periphery housing development was formed around big industrial developments. So during the mass housing construction, this approach did not exist already. But in the structure of the documents of the territorial planning that was enacted at that time, it provided for big zoning centers that were geared to the future plans for the development of this area. Introducing large-scale housing. Then the periphery phenomenon. So I think that everyone knows the story about about these three scientists. They touch the different parts of the body of the elephant, and no one can figure out what the elephant looks like. And so then the periphery, if you don't study the entire gamut of housing, so you will never get the comprehensive picture in its entirety. And so this is very important. So there is no such thing as bad environment, good environment. Housing development, bad housing, good housing. It should be regarded in its entirety. So the periphery is a natural place for the organization, for the administration of different urban styles of living styles. So in my view, currently the key point I would like to bring to your attention: we are should we arrogate upon ourselves certain property rights, or should we wait until they will prepare the ground for us, and then we'll just move in and make everybody happy? I think that this point is the point of no return. So this is kind of an exam for civil responsibility, and so to enter into any housing developments and into any territory, so you need to make every person be responsible for the property, for the real estate, and for the environment that each and everyone will be responsible for. And then we need to keep in mind the difference of living styles, which will impact the quality of the city architecture. Very short comment on behalf of the team of research. I'd like to thank Oleg Artyomovich, who was sincerely, openly, and disinterestedly sharing his ideas. That's why this area of zoning, this question of zoning, was discussed at the roundtable discussion, whose results you can find later at our booth. And so some points of view don't coincide, but I think that there should be certainly a city policy in this. Can I make a short comment? Very short comment. So then, good zoning in housing development with high-rise blocks of apartments. So then, how to regulate the number of cars in the city? Because the way we zoned it, so in this community, for example, we agreed where to park the cars, but everything that's outside our zone. So, for example, everything is all mine. So notice everywhere. So we need to know. People just park cars wherever they want. This is not. Once the zoning has been done, so then this socialism dies tomorrow. Because these things are interconnected very rigidly, because if you become responsible, you cannot do it in a haphazard manner anymore, and you cannot park your car any way you want. Okay. It's neither here nor there. Okay, I don't want to turn my back on anyone. I would like to apologize. Good evening. That I cannot comment on the main presentation because I was stuck in a traffic jam, and I saw only the end of the presentation. It's known that good work always generates new ideas. So new professional comments, reaction, interest, and even just having heard only the end of my presentation, so I understand that this work is worthy of our attention, and it should be introduced in the area of professional iterations. And we need to put it in this a piggy bank of our knowledge, so knowledge of our history and heritage, culture, so that we could get an objective picture of the of something that we have now. I mean, the city development of Moscow, and then in a desultory manner, I would like to make a couple of short comments. So you need to feel Moscow in its in its three-dimensional fashion. And because unfortunately no culturologists have been enlisted to work on the development of Moscow, which is strange for Moscow architecture, for Moscow of the present day, and so no professional culturologists. And then the lawyers who could give just a good sound, so legal evaluation of the present and the future. And so unfortunately, so they are kind of on periphery vis-a-vis these processes, and so without without lawyers and cultural and the people who are involved in culture, nothing gets done. So then in Germany, so the departments of the city development departments. It's completely different from the Department of Transportation in Moscow, from the Department of City Development. Completely different knowledge, completely different properties, and unlike Moscow. So these three positions, we heard for those three positions, when we talk about Moscow development. So the most recent census that the Russian Empire held at Moscow, they stated that the cities of Moscow, the citizens of Moscow region, they are involved in gardening and it's mostly gardening. So they are just digging in their backyards in their vegetable patch. And so when I was a boy, I remember just people said that Moscow is a big village because there was a huge several spikes of influxes of people coming to Moscow. So in the 50s and the 60s there were big intakes of citizens, and Moscow is a super. It's an animal that expands. That is like a snow plow, just takes more and more territory and then expands in all directions. And then the expansion of Moscow gobbled up thousands of villages, and that's why you get the impression that we lived for several decades in the big village, because it expanded and covered, ingested lots of villages, and now stopped at the Moscow Circular Highway. And so starting from 1952, 1953, that's the way it was evolving. Those were huge overnight districts, so huge housing developments, new ones, absolutely disorganized. You couldn't even understand logically how to build all this infrastructure and communications. But we had the strict, one-man strong management, socialistic management. So kindergarten, schools, swimming pools. So then there were no cars. People didn't have any cars. Only public transportation existed. And it is true that today it was correctly said that we are witnesses the following development. That what we have now, just we can describe as designing against the background of unpredictability, unpredictable backdrop, designing against it. And so we know the history of our city and how it's been developing, and but we don't have it inside. It's not in the marrow of our brains. And if we don't have this feeling of heritage, so then we'll always have those jokers that would come out of the pack of cards unexpectedly, and that certainly impacts the development of the city as a theory of probability. So what we have now, we talk about the discipline of the city. So always forgetting the fact that in the Russian Empire before 1917, so any architect could be whipped by any policeman for the violation of the height of the building or the red lines. So it can be subjected to corporal punishment. And so this is, and so the codes that today they didn't have, but they had different codes. So the real the legal environment was different. That disciplined very rigidly the architects, and so now we're beginning to remember about that the city should be regulated very strictly. And the last point I wanted to make, so during my activities as a designer and as an architect, so what is Moscow today? And I calculated while I was listening so the idea of decentralization, polycentricity, so that's the buzzword. And it's a very old idea, very old idea. I think that today is we can celebrate the 40th anniversary when it was 1970, 1971. So the Institute of Moscow designed. So there was a master plan, the reconstruction of city, Moscow 71, 74, and it was not adopted. It was not approved, but was genuine. I don't know if Oleg Boyarsky participated in the development of this master plan, but this plan that was not accepted, was not adopted. This is exactly the plan that we have right now. So this is the Lushkov Moscow. And every administrative district had a center of planning zone. But it was not just a prefecture. It was several administrative districts that you got united together, put together within the framework of a planning zone. But the center of the planning zone, in the Soviet understanding, was the administrative center. And naturally, Mr. Grigoryan, so the first secretary of Moscow committee, so refused to share his power with those centers, and the idea was aborted. And during Lushkov's times, when he was the mayor, so this idea came along again. But Lushkov, who actually united those prefectures, so then several administrative districts together, just under one administration. So he did not want to share his power with the local governors of those and then we started to develop this agglomeration. So we realized that this idea is quite good, logical, reasonable. It needed to be the administrative function by itself. It does not determine the development of the city like the Soviet party management thought. So now just we talk about business activity should be there, culture, sports, recreation, trading, retail, whatever. That's what the modern center of this administration should be the center of gravity, should become the center of gravity, with the local authority of a number of administrative districts taken together. And then 80% of the business activity is concentrated in the central district of Moscow. The center of Moscow is overloaded, horribly overloaded. And the second point is the idea of park in the new districts should be filled in, should be supplemented by more point. Remember the Russian village. So when the Bolsheviks blew up the churches and burned down the mansions, so then the village became horrible. started to look horrible because the village is not architecture, because very difficult to find beautiful villages. Yeah, where they make the houses beautiful, and so very few. So when so they built, and so they saw beautiful things. No, but we need just to certainly ameliorate those districts. But we need to create some cultural centers that would be salient, that would be like churches in the villages, or like mansions of the noblemen, and so. Then it will be tepid, onerous, unattractive, and it won't work. And so we need to create this architectural background on the periphery. Yeah, Mr. Oliver Schulz. Mr. Oliver Schulz.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I realize we're getting close to the end of our session, but a few thoughts on the very inspiring research that we've heard. I'm a partner at Citymakers, a company based in Copenhagen and Moscow, so two very different cities, one smaller city, one bigger city. And we've had the great fortune both to win the Park Zariadje competition with the Diller and Scofidio team working in the center of the donut, the black hole in the research. And I've also worked on the Art Quartal project, which is, well, it's not in the donut, but it's touching the center of Moscow, and it includes big industrial areas. So it also has aspects that you could describe as periphery. Referring back to my previous speaker, I'm still trying to learn Moscow in 3 dimensions. I've learned already a lot about Moscow, but one thing that it made me think, the previous work, was I think it's great that the periphery is getting more into the radar. I've often worked with city center projects or projects that outside the city center try and somehow simulate the environment that we have in our city centers. And I've always felt that can't be the solution for the entire city with all its periphery. Sorry. So I would be very interested really in what happens actually in the next step. Research is great, but research in itself is not an end in itself. So I'm very interested to see how you move forward with this. I would like to know what's the beautiful donut step 2. I just wonder if there's more to it than thinking of transportation. For me, I think we're at a time today where our work patterns are radically changing, our living patterns are changing, the way we shop is changing. So I wonder actually whether, what is the potential of the donut? I think the good and bad is no longer in the same way. You've painted an interesting picture. But I hope that there will be much more to the donut 2.0. I think, the super park is an interesting idea. But for me, and maybe that's because I haven't felt the periphery of Moscow properly yet, but for me, a lot of system-built housing, just because a lot of people live with a window onto green space doesn't mean that they have great access or benefit from green space. So for me, a lot of the system-built legacy is actually highly dysfunctional. I don't think it's really fit for a lifestyle of the future. And I would be looking for ways, how can the super park actually become a super master plan that actually tells us much more about the future of living, working, and shopping in the periphery of Moscow. So I hope we can take that a step further. But I thank you for opening the understanding and the nature of the periphery. That was very interesting research. Thank you.
Спасибо.
And Evgeny Monets, please. Thank you. I represent Sergei Kuznetsov. I work at the Architecture Council. A very brief comment, if I may. I'd like to thank my colleagues that spoke at length about how to saturate periphery with substance. And so then functional zoning, functional programming is a key in the development of the way periphery will look like. There is another point that I have not touched upon, but it's the foundation, but you somehow overlooked it, is the panel Moscow, prefabricated panel, industrial, mass scale apartment blocks. And so what we know, there is a lot of it in the periphery. And so let me just quickly identify this huge challenge there, because the industrial construction, housing construction, industrial scale, and then the present days construction, so municipal housing, so it's owned only by a few companies, private companies. Well, all these prefabs, all these construction materials. That's why we are hostages of their capabilities to provide the necessary construction materials, and they're not going to modernize. And so they will be manufacturing the same prefab panels, the same bricks, the same window panes, and so you know the series, house series. So that we have lots of those houses just building like mushrooms, and just at the periphery, and it will continue for some years, and so that's why we need to remember about that. And so a request to all of you, so if you could help us all to meet this challenge, to welcome this challenge, and this because every time just. So we need to coordinate another project, that's another standardized apartment block. So which is that's like a round peg in a square hole, and which does not fit well. So there are no proper shape and form of this building. So then the weak identification of the facade, and so inefficient, weak, tepid look of this new apartment house. And we would like, we would appreciate if you come out with certain solution to this nuance of the development of periphery. And so we need to wrap up. But one little comment before we finish. I wanted to say a couple of words to Mrs. Lavrinets. And certainly we need to look at the recommendation of our economists. And they say that so building that territory is continuous the sustainable degradation of this territory. Certainly, so housing may be built there, but only if certain conditions are met. And I would like to react to what Mr. Schulz was saying, that in Google 2.0, in Google. So there's a good metaphor of super park. It's not actually a park at the end of the day, but it's a park that includes business, jobs, industrial on the industrial territories. So a very fragile attitude towards the way you treat the ground, because. And for these panel houses, and it's in its entirety. It's not only just park. No, it's not. That's a metaphor, but it provides for a wider meaning of the word. There's a more in-depth, a multi-layered vision of this territory, including business, recreation, and shopping. Then so could I 1 minute? Could I? Actually, but very briefly, please. Very short historic comment. So the master plan of 1971 was adopted, approved by the Ministry of Ministers. So there were 8 planning zones with the centers. We had it all. But the length of the metro by 1990 should be 450 kilometers. That's what they said. So how can you talk about that? So we are 40 years behind. So by 1990, they were talking about 440 kilometers of metro. And so then the parks and everything, and the protecting green belt around Moscow, nothing got done. And this is a very important point, because I personally, I like this project very much, but I have some reservations. So maybe we're building another utopia. Is it not the case? Because developing similar things and working them, even conceptually, so we need certainly to to compare them to reality. So because you want to avoid the same thing. So when in 1960 they were saying that 450 kilometers of metro lines would be built. So why should we say 450 if we can build only 100? We need to be realistic. We need to be pragmatic. So we need to know who is responsible for this territory, who is responsible for that territory, if it becomes a public territory. All these aspects need to be properly digested, understood, and slept upon. But this is the next stage. And here I wanted to make another important point. It's not a project, and if you can call it a project, it's an art project or a research project or study. It's no more than that. So the main idea is just to attract public attention to this territory, to increase awareness. That's the whole point. No more than that. So we do not understand development as construction. So just the other way around. So this is diametrically opposite. We do not regard it as such. But to see it is already a big half of the battle. Just to see it, to look at it, and then joining efforts, we'll be able to find some local solutions. It's not even a strategy, it's a vision. Okay, thank you very much. So see you at the next meeting. Thank you.